The night was colder than usual. The heavy, looming shadows of trees stretched across the deserted alley as a black car crept forward. Inside the car, a man adjusted his rearview mirror, his eyes scanning the street ahead with cold, calculating precision. The dim streetlights cast an eerie glow on his face, showing the sharpness of his jawline and the emptiness in his gaze. He was waiting for the call. His phone vibrated once, then twice, and on the third ring he answered. The voice on the other end was familiar but lacked warmth. "He's still with her," the voice growled, low and harsh. "I want him gone. Now." The man in the car nodded even though the caller couldn't see him. "Understood. When?" "Tonight." "No mistakes," came the response. The line clicked and the call ended. As the man sat back in his seat, his fingers tapped nervously on the steering wheel. The job was simple: eliminate the target. But there was something about this one that gnawed at his mind. The instructions had been clear, no questions asked, but as a professional he couldn't help but wonder who would want to kill a man just for dating someone. Especially someone like her. He was hired by someone who couldn't understand the love between his daughter and a man who didn't fit into his world. A man who had the audacity to defy everything the father had taught her. Edward Montgomery sat in his large, mahogany-paneled study, the leather chair creaking under his weight. He was a man of routine, of control, of power. The kind of man whose every decision shaped the lives of those around him. His fingers traced the edges of the glass of bourbon in front of him, but his mind was elsewhere. His daughter Ashley had always been the perfect picture of a lady, well-spoken, educated, charming. Edward had done everything to raise her right, the way he thought a woman of their status should be. But there was one thing Ashley had done that made Edward lose his composure. She had fallen in love with a black man. Ashley had introduced him to her father 2 weeks ago, Derrick Johnson, a young man with broad shoulders, a soft smile, and eyes that spoke of ambition. He seemed respectful enough, but something about him didn't sit right with Edward. The way he looked at Ashley, the way he held her hand so casually, it made Edward feel like a stranger was stepping into his domain. Edward could tolerate many things but not this. "Derrick doesn't belong in our world," Edward muttered under his breath as he stood up from his chair and paced the room. His hands clenched into fists, veins throbbing in his forearms. His pride was at stake and he would do anything to preserve it. He had been quiet about his dislike for Derrick at first. He watched from a distance, hoping it was just a phase for Ashley. But when he saw her kiss him goodbye outside their home, his decision was final. No daughter of his would be with someone who wasn't worthy of her. Ashley had tried to explain, but the more she talked, the more Edward's heart hardened. He couldn't understand how she couldn't see what he saw. Derrick was a mistake, a blemish on everything Edward had worked for. And if he had to go, then so be it. Back in the black car, the hitman was parked a few blocks away from Ashley's apartment, his eyes locked on the building. He had been in situations like this before, jobs that didn't make sense, that felt like they were rooted in hatred rather than any real reason. But a job was a job, and he wasn't in a position to question his clients. It was his duty to make sure things were done. But as he watched the lights flicker inside the apartment, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The daughter, Ashley, had seemed like a nice person. She didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire of her father's hate. And Derrick, well, the guy wasn't bad either. He was a fighter. The hitman had seen it in his eyes. He didn't think the man deserved to die. But that wasn't his decision to make. He wasn't in the business of questioning. He was in the business of execution. Inside her apartment, Ashley sat on the couch, her fingers nervously twisting a loose thread on her sweater. She hadn't spoken to her father since the disastrous dinner 2 days ago, and each second felt like an eternity. Her heart ached, torn between loyalty to her family and the love she felt for Derrick. She had tried to explain things to her father, but he refused to listen, his anger clouding his judgment. "I don't care who he is, Ashley," Edward had told her. "You could do better. You're throwing your future away for someone who doesn't even belong in our world." Those words cut deep, but it was Derrick who had been there for her when her father wasn't. It was Derrick who supported her dreams, who understood her in ways no one else could. But her father couldn't see that. "Maybe he's right," Ashley whispered to herself, staring at the floor, but then she shook her head. "No, I know who I love. I know who he is." A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Her heart skipped a beat as she walked to the door, unsure of what to expect. When she opened it, Derrick stood there, a smile on his face, holding a bouquet of her favorite flowers. "Hey, beautiful," he greeted her warmly, but there was something in his eyes that told her he knew things weren't okay. "Hi," Ashley stepped aside, letting him in. The weight of the tension between them was palpable, but they tried to push it aside, clinging to the comfort they found in each other. Derrick set the flowers down on the table and took her hands in his. "Your dad still giving you trouble?" Ashley sighed, biting her lip. "It's worse than ever. I don't think he'll ever accept us." Derrick frowned, but his voice remained steady. "He'll come around?" "I don't think he will," she said quietly. "I don't think I can change his mind." Before Derrick could respond, Ashley's phone buzzed on the table. She picked it up and her face drained of color as she read the message. It was from her father. "I gave him a chance. Now you and your boyfriend will pay the price." Ashley dropped the phone, her hand shaking. "Oh my God." Derrick's expression darkened. "What did he say?" Ashley's voice trembled. "He hired someone. To kill you?" The hitman was almost there. His mind was cold, but his heart thudded in his chest. The door to Ashley's apartment opened, and he could hear muffled voices from inside. But just before he could make his move, a phone call came in. It was from Edward Montgomery. "Is it done?" Edward's voice came through the line, tense and impatient. The hitman hesitated. The job was nearly complete, but something inside him wasn't right. "Not yet. Something's off. I'll take care of it soon." "Do it now," Edward barked. But the hitman was already walking away from the door. Something inside him told him to stop, and this time for once he listened. Ashley stared at Derrick, her mind racing. Her father's text felt like a dagger in her chest. Could he really do something so horrible? She had always known Edward Montgomery as a stubborn, prideful man, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. Derrick took a step toward her and gently cupped her face. "Ashley, look at me. We'll get through this. He's just trying to scare you." She shook her head vehemently. "No, Derrick. You don't understand. My father, he doesn't make empty threats. If he said he hired someone, he meant it." Derrick's jaw clenched. He wasn't afraid, not for himself, but for her. "Then we need to get out of here. Tonight." Ashley nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "But where will we go?" "He'll find us. He always does." Derrick grabbed her hands firmly. "I don't care where we go as long as you're safe. Pack a bag. I'll handle the rest." As Ashley moved toward the bedroom, Derrick picked up her phone and stared at the message. His instincts told him to fight back, to confront Edward directly, but he knew that would only escalate things. Instead, he pocketed the phone, resolving to protect Ashley at all costs. The hitman, Marcus Kane, drove aimlessly through the city streets, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. For years, he had prided himself on being detached from his work, but this job was different. There was something about Edward's tone, the venom in his voice when he spoke about Derrick, that unsettled Marcus. It wasn't about money or power, it was about hate. As he turned down a quiet street, Marcus pulled into an empty parking lot and lit a cigarette. His mind wandered back to a memory he thought he had buried long ago, a time when he had loved someone who didn't fit into his world. That love had been ripped away by people like Edward Montgomery, people who couldn't see past their own prejudice. "Damn it," Marcus muttered, running a hand through his hair. He knew he couldn't go through with the job. Not this time. Instead, he made a decision. He would warn them. Derrick and Ashley were just stepping out of the apartment building with their hastily packed bags when Marcus appeared. He leaned casually against his car, his leather jacket blending into the shadows. "Leaving so soon?" he said, his voice calm but firm. Ashley froze, recognizing him immediately. Her father had mentioned a man who'd handled things for him, though she'd never thought she'd meet him face to face. Derrick instinctively stepped in front of her, his shoulders squared. "Who are you?" Marcus held up a hand, showing he meant no harm. "Relax, I'm not here to hurt anyone. Quite the opposite, actually." Ashley's eyes narrowed. "You're the one my father hired, aren't you?" Marcus nodded slowly. "Yeah. But I'm not here to do what he thinks I'm going to do." Derrick's fists clenched. "Why should we believe you?" Marcus sighed, his gaze steady. "Because I've seen this play out before and I'm not about to let it happen again. Your father, he's a bitter man and he doesn't care who he hurts as long as he gets his way. But you two don't deserve this." Ashley stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Then why are you here?" "To warn you," Marcus said bluntly. "Your father won't stop. Even if I walk away, he'll find someone else to do the job. You need to disappear, completely." Derrick studied him, searching for any sign of deceit. "Why would you help us? What's in it for you?" Marcus hesitated, then pulled a small photograph from his jacket pocket. It was old and worn, showing a younger version of himself with a woman of a different race. They looked happy in love. She was everything to me, Marcus said quietly. But her family didn't approve. They made sure we didn't have a future. I couldn't stop them then, but maybe I can stop it now. Ashley's eyes softened, and for the first time she felt a glimmer of hope. What do we do? Marcus gestured to his car. Get in. I'll take you somewhere safe. Back in his study, Edward paced furiously, his phone clutched tightly in his hand. Marcus hadn't reported back and his patience was wearing thin. He dialed Marcus's number, but it went straight to voicemail. This is unacceptable, Edward muttered, slamming the phone down on his desk. He grabbed his coat and stormed out of the house, determined to take matters into his own hands. Edward drove to Ashley's apartment, his mind racing with thoughts of betrayal. If Marcus had failed, he would deal with Derrick himself. No one defied Edward Montgomery and got away with it. Marcus drove them to an old cabin deep in the woods, a place he had used as a safe house years ago. The air was crisp, and the only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. This is where you'll stay for now, Marcus said, handing them a burner phone. I'll be in touch, but don't contact anyone else. Not your friends, not your family. Your father has eyes everywhere. Ashley looked around, her heart heavy but grateful. Thank you, she said softly. For everything. Marcus nodded, his expression unreadable. Just stay safe. As he turned to leave, Derrick stopped him. What about Edward? He won't just let this go. Marcus's gaze darkened. I'll handle him. Edward arrived at Ashley's apartment to find it empty. Rage bubbled inside him as he realized Marcus had betrayed him. But he wasn't one to back down. He had connections, resources, and a deep-seated determination to bring his daughter back, no matter the cost. What Edward didn't know was that Marcus had a plan of his own. He wasn't just going to protect Ashley and Derrick. He was going to expose Edward for the man he truly was. Marcus had spent years collecting dirt on powerful people like Edward, and now he would use it. As Edward ramped up his efforts to find Ashley, Marcus began leaking information to the press. Details about Edward's shady business dealings, his history of threats, and his unyielding prejudice. The world began to see the man behind the polished exterior, and Edward's reputation started to crumble. Meanwhile, Ashley and Derrick found solace in each other, growing stronger in the face of adversity. For the first time they felt free from Edward's control, free to be themselves. But they knew the fight wasn't over. Edward wouldn't stop until he had destroyed everything in his path. And neither would Marcus. Edward's once glorious empire was unraveling thread by thread. The media storm surrounding the leaked information grew stronger every day. Headlines splashed across newspapers. Edward Montgomery exposed. Ruthless tycoon or ruthless tyrant? Edward's business partners were distancing themselves, shareholders were withdrawing, and whispers of investigations into his practices filled corporate boardrooms. He stormed into his office, slamming his fist onto the desk. Marcus Kane, he growled, the name spitting venom from his lips. Marcus wasn't just a hired gun. He was a ghost from Edward's past, a mistake Edward thought he'd buried. Years ago, Edward had crossed Marcus during a similar ordeal. Marcus had been in love with the daughter of one of Edward's associates, a union Edward had crushed with ruthless efficiency. He never thought Marcus would resurface, much less betray him now. This isn't over, Edward hissed, dialing one of his most trusted enforcers. Find Kane. And find my daughter. Ashley and Derrick spent their days at the cabin in uneasy peace, but the isolation weighed on them. The quiet nights often gave way to Ashley's nightmares of her father barging through the door. Derrick remained her rock, though his own fears simmered beneath the surface. Late one evening as they shared a quiet dinner, the sound of tires crunching on gravel froze them. Derrick stood, motioning for Ashley to stay behind him as he peeked through the window. A black SUV had parked just beyond the tree line. Two figures emerged, one carrying a rifle. They found us, Derrick whispered, his voice tense. Before Ashley could respond, Marcus's car pulled up behind the SUV. He stepped out, a pistol tucked at his side. The men from the SUV turned toward him, their weapons raised. You're making a mistake, Marcus called out, his tone calm but deadly. You think Edward Montgomery is loyal to anyone but himself? One of the men sneered. We're not here for you, Kane. Just step aside. Marcus shook his head. You'll have to go through me first. Ashley, watching through a crack in the curtain, gasped. He's going to get himself killed. But before Derrick could pull her back, gunshots rang out. In the chaos, Marcus proved why he was feared in the underworld. He moved with precision, taking down one of the enforcers with a single shot and disarming the other with a well-placed blow. When the dust settled, Marcus walked over to the SUV, opened the trunk and pulled out an unconscious man, Edward Montgomery's driver. Marcus dragged him to the cabin, tossing him onto the porch like a sack of potatoes. "He was supposed to report back to your father," Marcus explained. "Now he won't." Derrick helped Ashley inside, but she stopped and turned to Marcus. "Why are you still helping us? You don't owe us anything." Marcus's face softened, a rare vulnerability breaking through his hardened exterior. "Because someone once helped me when I thought I was a lost cause. I didn't take their advice and I lost everything. I won't let history repeat itself." As the trio regrouped, Marcus's burner phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. "It's Edward," he said. Ashley's heart sank. "What does he want now?" Marcus answered the call, putting it on speaker. "I underestimated you, Kane," Edward's voice boomed, cold and calculating. "But you've made a mistake by keeping Ashley alive. She's my daughter and she'll come back to me." "Not a chance," Marcus replied coolly. Edward chuckled. "We'll see about that. Look outside." Confused, Marcus, Ashley, and Derrick stepped onto the porch. Far down the winding dirt road, headlights appeared, dozens of them. "He sent more," Marcus muttered, pulling his gun. But then Edward dropped the real bombshell. "Marcus, did you think I wouldn't learn about the cabin? I've had someone inside your little operation all along." Before anyone could react, a sharp pain erupted in Marcus's side. He staggered, dropping his gun as Derrick caught him. Behind them, the man Marcus had knocked out earlier stood holding a knife, his face twisted in a grin. "Sorry, Kane. Business is business." As Marcus collapsed, Ashley felt a surge of adrenaline. She grabbed his gun and pointed it at the traitor, her hands trembling. "Don't move," she shouted. The man smirked. "You don't have the guts." Derrick stepped in front of her, shielding her once again. "We don't have to do this," he said firmly. But Ashley wasn't backing down. "No, Derrick. I'm done hiding. I'm done running." She fired a warning shot into the ground, startling the man enough for Derrick to tackle him. They tied him up quickly, using supplies Marcus had stashed in the cabin. "We need to leave now," Derrick said, pulling Marcus to his feet. The group piled into Marcus's car and sped off just as Edward's reinforcements arrived. Ashley knew her father wouldn't stop, but Marcus had one final card to play. As they drove, Marcus revealed the extent of the dirt he had on Edward. "This isn't just about you two anymore," he said weakly, clutching his wound. "This is about making sure your father can never hurt anyone again." He handed Ashley a flash drive. "Take this to the media. It's everything, his bribes, his blackmail, his threats. Once this goes public, he's finished." Ashley hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. "But he's still my father." Derrick placed a hand on hers. "And you're not like him. Do what's right." Ashley and Derrick delivered the flash drive anonymously, ensuring its contents reached the right hands. Within days, Edward Montgomery's empire crumbled completely. Federal agents raided his offices, seizing documents and assets. Edward was arrested on charges ranging from fraud to conspiracy to commit murder. As Edward was led away in handcuffs, he glared at the cameras. "This isn't over," he shouted, but the world had already turned its back on him. Months later, Ashley and Derrick sat on a quiet beach, the sound of waves crashing around them. Marcus, now fully recovered, joined them, a rare smile on his face. "You two made it," he said simply. Ashley nodded. "Because of you?" Derrick added, "What will you do now?" Marcus gazed at the horizon. "Keep moving. Maybe help a few more people along the way." As the sun set, the trio shared a quiet moment, knowing they had not only survived but triumphed against the odds. They had broken free of Edward's control, and for the first time in years they were truly free.